I grew up in West Texas, and so in dry country, and so brown was beautiful to me. And then when I came to Oklahoma, I started seeing all this green wheat pasture, and I thought, oh my goodness. And then the more I learned about that particular enterprise, it's been something that I've just been really intrigued with for a really long time. So we started talking about trying to develop what we were calling at that time an expanded wheat pasture research and education program to focus on a multidisciplinary research program, animal science, plant and soil science, and agricultural economics, and occasionally some input from, or some involvement of entomology and plant pathology. But it very definitely has been a team effort. It's been a lot of fun. The handout that was distributed, I've listed some names that have been involved in this program. I didn't count them, but it must be at least 15 or more faculty that have been involved. And as I said, we started that dialogue, that discussion in about 1978, 1980, thereabouts. And with the help of a lot of people, starting with State Senator Ed Long, and you can look down the list, with the help of a lot of people, we were able to get federal funding started in 1988 by appropriation within the Rural Development and Ag Appropriations Bill. And there were really three overarching goals that we talked about. First, to improve the technical efficiency, or at least the one that I have listed first, improve the technical efficiency of production and profitability of the 1.5 million stocker cattle. Those were the numbers we were talking about in Oklahoma. And then we said, well, this is not just an Oklahoma thing. If we look at the numbers of cattle in Texas, the panhandle of Texas, Kansas, a little bit of New Mexico, etc., those numbers at that time, people talked about 5.5 million head of cattle. But from an economic standpoint, to improve the technical efficiency of production of those cattle was part of the things that we talked about. The one in the middle there, to decrease production risk and income variability and increase growth of the industry. At that particular time, the feedlot industry, and it seemed like we've been talking about this for a long time, but we said there was excess capacity in the feedlot industry, and which outstripped the number of feeder cattle available. And so the feed yards were interested in inventorying their feeder cattle supplies out on grass, and wheat pasture was one of those things that they looked to, and that was part of the idea as growth of the industry. And then the last one there, to strengthen the economies of rural communities in Oklahoma and the southern Great Plains. So as far as the middle one of those, decreased production risk and income variability, risk or uncertainty decreases the value of cattle. Whether you're a private stocker producer or whatever, if you cannot estimate within some area, if you can't get a good estimate of rate of gain, you can't figure out, you can't calculate a realistic break-even selling price. Without that, you don't know whether the market's offering you a profit or loss. And as far as the feedlot industry, placing cattle and growing those cattle on wheat pasture prior to bringing them into the feedlot, they asked three questions. When can you take our cattle? When can you ship them? When will you be shipping them off of wheat? And what will they weigh? And if you couldn't fairly well answer those questions, they kind of, that meant a lot of them because they couldn't do some things as far as hedging those cattle and other things as far as risk management. So one of the things that we looked at from a supplementation standpoint was to look at what we could implement as far as decreasing variability of performance and decreasing risk of those cattle. We did some of the work with feeding silage. Actually, was some work that we did down at Fort Reno before we were able to bring this unit online. But one of them, if you look through that handout, there's about 16 or so areas there that we worked in. One was to develop a large package energy supplementation program designed again to add stability to potentially very unstable forage supply, and again to decrease production risk with respect to cattle weight gain. Now another part of that would be if we, the first one, if we could, with a supplementation program or whatever, or increased forage production, where we wanted to maybe purchase more cattle on a seasonal low market in the fall, increase stocking density, and inventory more cattle for spring graze out period. So it was both from a standpoint of bringing more cattle in, adding stability to their performance, and in sync with maybe the seasonality of cattle prices. So the idea there, we did develop that supplementation program. That was like the first 3 or 4 years, and we called it a large package energy supplement. It was a supplement that was designed to be fed at about 0.75% of body weight per day. We looked at corn-based or starch-based supplements or byproduct-based supplements, mids, soybean hulls, etc. And it increased rate of gain of those cattle by about 1/3 of a pound. It allowed us to increase stocking rate by 1/3, and that response was fairly consistent over different stocking rates or forage availabilities. One of the things that we've talked about as far as some bellwether management practices for growing cattle on pasture would start with implants. Implants are increase rate of gain of cattle on wheat pasture by about 1/3 of a pound. They increase protein deposition. They increase nitrogen retention. So from that standpoint, there would be, you could say they're a green technology as far as decreasing nitrogen excretion into the environment. And without question, they provide the greatest return per dollar invested of any management practice that we know of. So we did studies with implants. The bottom line is they increased gain again by about 1/3. We tried, increased rate of gain on wheat pasture by about 1/3 of a pound a day. We tried to follow those cattle through the feedlot. They increased carcass weights coming out of the feedlot, which is a really important as far as the feedlot industry. They didn't affect marbling the score, and they did not change the distribution of carcass quality grades. Another one that we've talked about and we did research relative to was striving to get an efficacious dosage of monensin into cattle. It says monensin because monensin was reported by Brainine and Gallion back in 1990, work at New Mexico State University, that it decreased bloat We did work here in 1999 that also showed that it decreased bloat, and it was more efficacious than lasalicid in doing that. So we worked on several delivery methods trying to get an efficacious dosage of monensin to cattle. One of these programs we called an Oklahoma Green Gold Supplementation Program. Again, an energy supplement to try to provide additional energy as far as utilizing the large amount of protein, excess protein that's in wheat pasture. Designed to be hand-fed at a rate of 2 pounds per head per day or 4 pounds every other day, and should contain 75 to 100 milligrams of monensin per head per day is what we worked with. That program increased gain of our cattle initially about 0.42 pounds per head per day, and a supplement conversion rate of a little less than 5, which works out to be very powerful economically if you can do that, depending upon the price spread between stockers and feeders. There was a lot of times where it would add another $35 per head or so to cattle coming off of wheat pasture. Variability of consumption of those supplements is important. We tried to look at variation by stall feeding cattle or the old pinpointer systems, and you can see here that is where we partition those cattle between low variation. As you increase variation, rate of gain decreased from 1.8 to 116, and daily gain from about 306 down to 256. And so variation of supplement is very important in addition to just the mean supplement intake. Excuse me, I'm going to have to take a drink. We did it the old-fashioned way, individual stalling cattle or with pinpointers. The work that you're going to see, some of the technologies that Dr. Reuter is using with the smart feed system is going to make this work look like child's play and will really add a lot of additional data as far as formulating supplements and trying to minimize variation in intake. The other important thing is where we looked at the cattle that ate less than 150 milligrams, you can see their gain was 275. Those that ate greater than 150, about another 0.2 of a pound as far as their daily gain. Another way we looked at trying to get monensin into cattle on wheat was looking at including it in a mineral mixture. This was Brian Fieser's, some of Brian Fieser's work. The treatments here were negative control, no supplement, then a mineral mixture without monensin, mineral mixture with monensin. And so here's Brian's data from about 4 years. And a non-medicated mineral, cattle will eat a lot of it. This was a high calcium, low phosphorus mineral. They eat a lot of it. The monensin decreases intake. That's both a good thing and a bad thing as far as managing intake. But in these cases, the average there was about 120 grams of monensin per head per day. There's a graph of intakes of a non-medicated mineral, and here is with the medicated mineral. Again, it's much more consistent. It helps you manage the intake of that mineral. Again, it's a fine line as far as getting the dosage into cattle. From a rate of gain standpoint, and I think Stacy Gunter's going to talk more about this afternoon, just a plain mineral increased rate of gain by about 2.2 pounds, add monensin another 0.2 pounds, and so economically it's a really, really powerful thing, and I realize that it's been a while since I updated that slide. There was a time when value of weight gain on cattle on wheat pasture was $1.40 per pound. That's been several years ago, but that's a fluctuating value. But the main point is that it's a slam dunk thing as far as the economics of feeding that particular mineral. So I think from a labor standpoint, as far as supplementing cattle, but also from a standpoint of trying to condition cattle, to train cattle, so that you can get a bloat preventative compound into those cattle when needed. That is, maybe when Monensin is not decreasing the degree of bloat as much as we would like. Then at least if you're using one of those programs, at least you've got cattle used to coming to something, you've got them positioned where that you can ramp those cattle up pretty fast on some other true bloat preventative like paloxylene in the face of bloat outbreaks. Here's one of the more recent studies that we did with that R1600 mineral. Consumption was 81 milligrams per head per day, and again, that's always been the question we've asked. For any product like Monensin or whatever, the question is, what's the dosage for optimum rate gain, but also the dosage for decreasing bloat. And so in this study, you can see that that average intake of 81 milligrams of Monensin did a nice job as far as decreasing bloat. Here's the control cattle, the Monensin cattle as far as bloat score 1, 2, or 3, and also as far as the frequency of bloat. You can't hardly see that slide, but that's a cow and a baby calf, and that's on a ranch in Montana. This is the wheat pasture story typically. Those cattle came in that particular year later than we would like, but toward the end of October. This is what our wheat pasture looked like that year. This is about January 27. We're getting low on forage. Those cattle have quite a bit of mud on them, so Taylor, there are other years where it can get pretty muddy. This is 92, 93. And there's a steer, one of those calves in the feed yard. These cattle are some of the bigger, the more fleshy cattle that are placed on feed, but yet they haven't read the book that says that they're not supposed to perform as well as they do because they're big, because they're fleshy. They're some of the better performing cattle in the feedlot. That pen closed out at a feed to gain of about 5.8 dry matter conversion. So the last one of those sections of the studies that we conducted in the handout then addressed the question, the effects of stocker programs, whether it be wheat pasture or some of our summer native range programs, intensive early stocking, season-long stocking, etc. We've got a lot of ways that we can make cattle bigger in Oklahoma, but trying to get to some of the fundamental mechanisms as far as their differences in performance, where we looked at visceral organ mass and a lot of things there as far as potential energy drains or increase in maintenance energy requirements of those cattle. And so I need to go on, but one of the things that Philip Lancaster did here is to develop some relationships between, in this case, dry matter intake versus placement weight. Those cattle, on average, of that particular data set, IES season long and wheat pasture, ate 0.6 pounds more dry matter per 100 pounds of initial weight. 80G was fairly flat, and here's the feed to gain of 0.2 pounds higher feed to gain for every 100-pound increase in placement weight. So the point is that in doing these trials, we leveraged other resources in the experiment station, and that in this case, it was a cross timbers stocker range. Again, in this case, this is a fall wean replacement heifer. We leveraged, again, with our range facilities at Stillwater, Dr. Lawman, Dr. Wetterman. This is a way to diversify a wheat pasture operation. This is a fall wean heifer calf. To run heifers at some point to breed those heifers and then sell them as bred heifers. The question has been, when can you breed them? Can you breed them on wheat pasture and get satisfactory consumption rates? Here's the data on that with after a fairly short period of time of a timed AI period of 53% pregnant and 43 at the end of a very short timed AI period. And here's the final pregnancy status. That is an AI period on wheat pasture. Those heifers were bred on wheat pasture. A fairly short time period. And here's the final pregnancy rate after turning in a cleanup bull on wheat pasture of 95 and 88. So again, that's a way to diversify and to a wheat pasture operation, and that's a wonderful opportunity that people like Verl Bronson up at Perry has used for a really, really long time. I need to stop. Again, we've looked at this. This has been a wonderful unit, but one of the things I'm trying to communicate is that it's just a part of all the wonderful opportunities we have in Oklahoma to grow cattle, to make them bigger prior to placing those cattle on feed. And so it's here in Marshall, but again, a lot of the work that has been done here is looking again into a total integrated approach as far as how we grow cattle and make them bigger in the state of Oklahoma.